Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Michael Harding podcast. It's the first week in August. Sunday is the 6th of August, and the 6th of August is the feast of the Transfiguration. That's where the problem begins, isn't it, for us modern people? Even the word feast really doesn't mean what it used to mean. A feast, I don't even know what it means now. I know that what it used to mean maybe hundreds of years ago was a festival day, a kind of the way at Christmas and you'd have an extra bit of food and you'd say, well, that's a feast. And then the time comes where we have so much food that we don't know the difference between a feast and ordinary time, and we don't know the difference between ordinary time and fasting. And you're talking to somebody who is, I think I'm overweight by a few pounds, and that's putting it like mildly. And it doesn't bother me. I wouldn't be in any danger zone weight-wise. But inevitably as you get older, you start to put on the weight. And then you take less exercise. And all that sort of stuff. You get used to eating good big feeds of food and you're not working it off. So for me to talk about a feast is a bit like embarrassing. It's like a big fat monk talking about fasting. The big fat monk saying, oh, I'm fasting today. Now, when I say that, there's a little bit of me thinks, well, the image of the fat monk was very similar to the image of the Buddha. The Buddha was a man, as far as I understand, who became enlightened, but he knew that it wasn't a good idea to go to one extreme or the other, to go to, like, the rigorous fasting that would turn your body into a skeleton, and the feasting that would go on forever and make you very fat and give you a heart attack, and then you die because the fat would be wobbling on your heart and eventually it'd kill you. So the middle way was what the Buddha used as his best kind of idea. And in the same way, funny enough, I seem to remember the same thing being said by Jesus in the Gospels. Where he was talking to somebody and there might have been given off about who he was fraternizing with. He was fraternizing with what would be considered reprobates, tax collectors and others. And I think there's a remark somewhere, and I haven't looked this up because I'm only talking to you now off the top of my head for this morning, but I think he said something like, well, they criticized John, for not drinking and being an ascetic, and they criticized me for drinking and mixing with the wrong type. So they'll always criticize somebody. He was a man of the middle way as well. Jesus didn't go out looking for a crucifixion. He just was living a life, being a wise man. And ultimately, when they tried to deal with his life, St. Paul was one of the most amazing kind of people that got an insight into the life of Jesus. Began to realize that he had an encounter with Jesus himself. Whatever drama that St. Paul lived through, he lived through some drama and realized that in that drama he was encountering Christ, and Christ was saying to him, why are you persecuting me? Because your man was a zealot. St. Paul was a bit of a zealot, like hounding the Christians. So it's funny the way that, like, it's hard to get your tongue round the idea of the feast of the Transfiguration. It's hard to get your head around the word feast. And when you draw yourself into conversations about Buddha or about Jesus, it's not easy, is it? And one of the things I try to do in this podcast is to kind of share with you my natural story without it being like a forced podcast, without it being like, I'm doing a podcast about ideas. Because it's not the ideas that I'm interested in. It's not passing on. I always say I'm not a teacher. I'm not a scholar. And the reason I say that is because I'm not trying to pass on ideas. I'm not trying to transmit some sort of teaching, whether it be Buddhist or Christian or Muslim. I'm simply trying to share who I am in my story. At the moment, I'm looking out the window, and it's been very, very wet. It's been a terribly wet July in Ireland, and it's a little bit better this morning. There's There's a kind of a nice light in the sky, even though there's a lot of clouds. And in Donegal, where I am, because you can always see a long distance, there's no drumlins. Like in Monaghan and Cavan where I was reared, there's a fierce amount of drumlins. You can barely see far because there's always a hill in front of you and behind you and beside you and above you and below you. There's always these little hills, a basket of eggs they used to call them. And that was like a hard place to get long-distance views. You can get long-distance views in Donegal all the time. No matter where you are, unless you're inside the house with your eyes closed. You've got long distances. You've got slopes of mountains, mountains in the distance, beaches on one side of you, hills on the other side of you. And you've got the sea out there. And even though you don't see the sea all the time, like I don't see the sea now from where I'm situated in my little studio, but it's always there. When I go to bed at night and I open the window, it's like there's a presence in the room, and that presence is the sea. And that's the wondrous thing about Donegal, and that's where I am this morning. And I'm excited because always when I tip over into the month of August, I'm 5 days away from the Transfiguration. And of course, that's what I would want to share with you today. Not because I'm trying to teach something, not because I'm trying to put across ideas, but simply because I'm here. I come up here to Donegal to write. So it's a kind of a solitary place. It's a studio. I've already written one book in it called All the Things Left Unsaid. And I'm starting another book now in the autumn, please God. But I share with you sometimes my complete confusion about the subject. I don't propagate Christian values, or I don't propagate Christian ideas, but I share with you my feelings about them. And in some sense, I think that is a key. It is a key to how you can live well, how you can live with Christian faith, or Buddhist faith, or whatever you're having yourself. To live with faith is no longer about grasping it with your mind intellectually. It is no longer setting up a kind of a creed of ideas. It's about just living in the mystery. And it doesn't make the creed any less true. It's simply saying, look, there's all that stuff that's true, but I'm a confused human being, so I can only take little bits of it. And it's not that I'm taking it like by my power, but it's that the teachings or the wisdom of truth, whatever that is in the cosmos, that it penetrates me. And if it penetrated me completely and wholly, then I'd be an intelligent human being. I'd be a saint, or I'd be a mystic, or I'd be a professor. But I'm none of those things. I am a confused, fragmented, often anxious human being who is 70 years of age. And probably frightened. You know, it's a bit melodramatic to say that you're frightened of death. But at 70 years of age, you begin to think about it. And it's like, again, you're not even thinking about it with your mind, with your intellect. You're thinking about it like it's a feeling of somebody in the room. Like when I was young, there was always a ghost in the room. And the ghost was always a beautiful, wonderful, energetic presence that was going to take me forward. There was always tomorrow. There was always next year. There was always, even after I finished, let's say, a play or a book, there was always a new book, another play, another adventure. And it manifested beside me like a presence, like a hope. And I suppose at that time I would call that hope. I would call that living with hope. If somebody said, I saw your play, it was all right. Are you writing anything new? I'd say, yeah, I'm hoping to write something better next year. And I used to say that every play and every book was simply a rehearsal for the next book, because you'd write the next one better. And the strange thing is, when you come to about 70, And it may be younger for some people, and it may be 10 years older for many people. But there's some point comes in your life where the presence beside you is no longer looking forward. The ghost in the room is no longer giving you the hope that tomorrow you will do things better. No, the presence in the room is looking backwards. It draws you into memory, into reflection on your life. Maybe that's why I've done those memoir books in the past 10 years, kind of reflecting on life. Remembering life is a sort of a way of reflecting on it. But it's being 70 makes it also easier to take faith, religious faith, in a more open way, because you're not trying to tie it down to ideas. You've done all the ideas. I mean, if you're a Christian and you were reared as a Christian, you've done all this stuff. You've done, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of everything. You've done it all. And there probably were times in your life where you thought deeply about religion. Maybe there were times in life where you let go of your Christian faith and became Buddhist and did Buddhist practice. And maybe then you came back to Christianity. Maybe accidents brought you back. Who knows? Like sometimes people come back to the church because they have children, or because they get married, or because their child gets married, or whatever, or baptisms. And these accidents in life bring you back into, it's like a fish being drawn back into the main stream of the river. It's like we wander off on our own. We swim up a few alleyways, little brooks and rivulets, little streams that are off the main river. And we go up there and we're curious. We're trying to say, how am I a fish? What kind of fish am I? And then eventually you give up and you say, go on, we'll go back down into the main river and go home. And we're like that too, humans. We're like fish going home. I know it's very, very strange to think about the salmon and there's other fish. The eel is another one, but I mean they cross oceans to go home. And whenever in the spring, usually the 20th of April every year on the same day, I hear the cuckoo, and I know he's come such a long way from Africa. And then the swallows come. They've come home, or maybe they're on an adventure and they're going home when they leave us. But it's extraordinary how we have this sense of return, how we're like the salmon. And it's extraordinary too how being 70 gives you that feeling, There's the ghost in the room, and the ghost is looking back. The ghost is remembering life. It's like you had this secret lover all your life, right? And they've been talking to you in your head since you were about 10 years of age. I would say that the same voice has been talking in my head since I was 6. And that voice consistently talking in my head, always giving me hope, always saying there's another play tomorrow, there's another book to be written, there's another adventure down the road, always looking forward. And then you come to a certain age, for me it's 70, and it's like that presence is settling in the corner, and they're not looking forward anymore, they're kind of looking backwards. And I'm looking at the ghost, if I'm allowed to say that, I'm looking at the invisible ghost and I'm saying, where are we going now? Oh, there's a question, says the ghost. Where are we going now? What's next if we're only looking backwards? If we've become so old that we're only remembering, what's next? God only knows. It's a fair way to think about an angel. Do you know the way when I was young they used to tell me I had a guardian angel? The idea of an angel is like a messenger from God. So that the way we think about the angel, like with the wings, bright young boy like Peter Pan and big wings, wandering around behind my shoulder, that mightn't be the best way to think about angels. That an angel is kind of a disembodied energy, which is a messenger from God. That's like I know somebody, for example, who nearly had an accident in their car. And they were dreaming of something in their head, and they were getting angry in their head, and they were going round the corner. This is the way they described it, as they felt like they were completely conscious that they were almost about to crash, as if somebody was just pushing the car into a wall. And at that moment, the car started to kind of cross the line and accelerate, and they had to sort of pull the steering wheel around anti-clockwise to get back to realign it. And they felt that that movement was like some angel, some good angel, had put their hand on the steering wheel. So they had this experience first of a kind of a dark feeling, like a dark energy. Now it was coming from their emotions. It was coming from how they felt they were indulging in a big negative soup about somebody else. And as if their body was out of control, they felt it, the hands tightening around the steering wheel and the rage coming out of their foot. And the car was crossing the line. It was like some demon was pushing them over a cliff. And as they did it, they felt as if there was something even above that, something more powerful than that, pulling the steering wheel back right. So you could analyze that moment in modern terms of psychology and rationality and explain the entire business. In the same way as that you can explain the cosmos in terms of evolution. And then you have a materialist cosmos. You live in a materialist world. You are a materialist because that's what you're saying. It's just evolving and it's all matter. It's all there. It's all logical in some sense, psychological. But the other way is to mythologize it. It's the same experience, but the person is mythologizing it when they say that there was a demon got into me. I'm driving the car and I nearly crashed, but there must have been an angel in the back seat because they calmed it all. It's the same with evolution in the sense you can say that the thing is evolving in itself, or you can say it's being created from within. That doesn't change the materiality of the cosmos. You know, people who believe in a ground of being, in God as the ground of all cosmic being, people who believe that the entanglement of the universe, one atom or quantum to another, it's not denying it when you say that that in itself is the revelation of God. So you get the materialist who says, look, it's material, we have the science, we know what's happening, it's called evolution. And the person who believes in God is going to say, yeah, and that evolution is the beautiful revelation of God. God revealing God. So the cosmos is God. It's not that there's a God separate from the cosmos who's sort of floating around within the cosmos, tricking with things, manipulating things. It's that the cosmic reality, the world we live in, is itself God. And you'd say that's a bit imminent, that's a bit like pantheistic. No, it's simply deeply knowing that the transcendent one is always in unapproachable light beyond everything. So you get transcendence and you get immanence. And that's what I get in the room, with my angel. I get this sense of immanence because it's this beautiful light that's outside. There's huge clouds on Errigal, there's huge clouds all around me today, and they're just sitting at the tops of the mountains, and there's no wind, and there's a light breaking through every so often, shafts of light coming down on little hills, and it feels like transcendence. It feels like there's a depth to what I'm experiencing, which cannot be, it cannot be reduced to materials. I cannot look at this dawn rationally. I can only look at it with my heart. I can only look at it thinking that every single part of reality that I belonging has a depth to it that is infinite and unfathomable, so that it feels like another presence. And there's the transcendence, but at the same time, when I draw my eyes back into the room and I look at the walls, there's kind of wood paneling in front of me, which is absolutely gorgeous. I love it. That gives me a lovely studio sense, and there's a lovely bounce of it acoustically as well. And I have a few pieces of furniture, like 2 tables, and I have a writing desk, and I have a bookcase and a set of drawers, and that's it, But I look around the room, and I feel a presence in the room too. It's like she's waiting to talk to me all the time. There's this little voice. There's this little person beside me, and they've been talking to me since I was 6 years of age, and all I can do is say it might be an angel. The first time I was 6 years of age, I remember I was locking, the garage, and there was an old lock on it, and I was pressing the lock, and it's like I had a jump of consciousness. And I said, I will remember this moment. And you could say that was the first time that the template of being a writer revealed itself to me. I was becoming conscious. I was aware of myself locking the garage. And it seemed so fresh, so new, so extraordinary that I actually said, I will remember this. And that doing it would prove later that I did remember it. Like when 2 people put their names on a tree. John loves Mary, and the date. And they remember it years later. Well, it was the same for me alone, with a sense that there was somebody else there, some other presence. Now, we know it was only a voice in my head. It was only, an emerging consciousness of a young child. But I was awakening enough to mark the moment. And from that moment on, I began a dialogue. And there was one day, probably I was, I think, about 11 or 12 years of age, and I was cutting the hedge with the clippers, and I could say to this day where precisely on the hedge I was. I can remember them. I could nearly see the precise clippers with the old wooden handles, and I'm there clipping it, and it's like I hear a voice inside in my head. Now, I'm not talking about voices whispering through the ditch or something, but in my head I could feel the words forming, go. And it was like go in a positive way. Go, do it. Do it. I identified the voice at the time as Saint Clare. Now that was probably because there was a convent, a Poor Clare convent in Caventown, and I used to go there sometimes with my family as a child, usually to things like very special occasions. The one that I always remember was Christmas morning. The cathedral seemed like a secular place, a public space, but the convent was such a beautiful little church. It's still there, by the way, and still used, and still as vibrant in this sense of the sacred as it always was, but I loved that church. And the smell of the incense and the candles on a Christmas morning, and the voices of the nuns singing their morning prayers behind us, behind a grill. No wonder I thought of St. Clare. And there I am cutting the hedge, and I'm thinking of St. Clare. And she's saying, go, do it. Now that was another moment, probably a jump of consciousness as well. And I have often used that memory at crucial times in my early life when I was considering or contemplating things like becoming a priest. So it would be like, go do it was the advice, but I didn't know what the advice was for. And then when I would be in a moment of crisis, trying to make a decision, like, should I or should I not, take a chance and go to Maynooth to study for the priesthood, sure enough, I'd remember that voice, and I would obey it. And just so that you know how confused a person I am, how, in a sense, how confusing the spiritual life is. The spiritual life is an awful maze and mess, and you know that. You know this, because it's true, I believe, in everybody's life. The spiritual journey or path is not straight. Oh, it's so like being lost, in fact. It's so like going round in circles. It's like 40 years in the desert. There's no sat-nav in the spiritual life. Or if there is, it's one of those sat-navs that, lands you up at the top of a mountain when you're going the opposite direction because it just reads the name wrong. But the spiritual life is confusing and you don't know where you are. I made decisions in my life, let's say, to, go to Maynooth to be a priest, and I was following a voice that said, go do it. And I remember on the edge of ordination, because, in fact, I couldn't get ordained as a deacon. That's a kind of a serious ordination that comes preparatory to being ordained a priest, and it usually happens a year before you are ordained a priest. But when the time came for me to get ordination to the diaconate, the authorities just said to me, well, we're not ordaining you. We can't find any reason why, but we're just not. And it was like they didn't trust me. So I had to wait a year. Had to wait until a couple of weeks before my ordination to the priesthood, and then this preliminary ordination happened maybe 4 weeks beforehand. And I remember well, on the eve of that particular ordination, which was a no-going-back moment, and thinking, well, they have delayed it for 12 months, so maybe they don't think I'm suitable for this, and maybe I should just go out the door and leave. Or maybe I should go on and risk it. And there's a voice in my head saying, go do it. So I got ordained. Well, I suppose you might say the voice is approving whatever you do, no matter what it is. And that's true. That's true. Because 4 years later, I'm ordained, I'm a priest, I'm living as a curate in Fermanagh, and I'm in bed alone, and I'm supposed to be going away the next day. I've decided to leave the whole thing, retire. And I'm afraid maybe I shouldn't. And of course the voice says, go do it. So it's like there's this voice inside all the time, and it really pushes us over the cliff in positive ways. It encourages us to live life. If there's one thing consistent about it, this little angel says, live life. Do it. You may regret things you didn't do, but you'll never regret things you did. That sounds a bit weird. It does, but obviously I don't think it's meant in terms of black deeds, like if you rob somebody or lie, you will regret it. Time will catch up with you. But in the deeper sense of taking risks in love, taking risks to say, well, I'm doing this because I feel love is drawing me in this direction. And then maybe, a couple of years later, you want to move in a different direction. You'll never regret that you did it. You tried it. And there's a satisfaction in that. So it's the risk that you take in love. It's a leap into the light, somebody said to me one time, as opposed to a leap into the dark. It's a leap into the light. And you know what a leap into the light means. It's when you're contemplating that something will be hopeful and beautiful. A leap into the light. And you're afraid. And there's a voice that says, do it. Do it. I'm so grateful for that voice, So if there is an angel in the room with me now, I'm in this little studio, and I'm speaking to you who are there listening, so you can't see what I can see. I can see the room I'm in, but maybe there's something I can't see. Maybe there is a little person, an angel. And if there was, I'd be saying, I am so grateful to you because you have guided me through life. Even with that simple, single idea. If it's about love, do it. Risk it. No matter what. Don't be rational about it. Don't be afraid that it might be something that you won't be able to sustain. Risk it. And of course, the final thing to say is, no, this person in the room, this sense of a person in the room, that's only metaphor, because the very notion of angel is not an embodied person or not an embodied creature. The notion of angel is actually a disembodied creature. The only thing that angels are associated with in Islam and in Christianity is light. And it's very, very, there's a fella called Sheldrake. What a lovely name. Sheldrake. Sheldrake. And himself and Matthew Fox, Fox, Matthew Fox and Sheldrake being scientist, Fox being a theologian. And they did a beautiful book about angels. And what they do is they go through ancient texts in the early church, and Fox brings up various aspects and descriptions of angels, and he correlates them with the scientist fella. And they keep noting the consistency with which you can see how the people writing the scriptures and describing angels were very close to a whole lot of ideas that we now have about quantum physics and energy being light and light being energy, and the entanglement of the entire universe, the sense that things can travel the cosmos in a split second, in a moment. I don't think, you're not going to learn about quantum physics if you read it, but it's a lovely, lovely read about how the idea of angels is as sophisticated as quantum physics. And the sense of my friend who was in a car and felt like that the anger or the rage that started to boil up within them could only be described metaphorically, like as a demon, like they were just getting angry. And their anger was pushing out, and it was affecting the way they were holding the steering wheel. And it was affecting the way their foot was on the accelerator. And so they were starting to drive at a dangerously high speed, and they came to a bend, and they were crossing the line. They were going to hit the wall of death. And what happens? It's like out of nowhere came the effort to calm it down, to turn the wheel, steady the car. And they could only describe that as that an angel had stepped in to save them. And if you analysed what happened in that car in terms of psychological processes, the integration of psychological and embodiment and physics, you'd find that the description that there was an angel that stepped in, it's not absurd. It's a very plausible way to describe it in mythic terms. But, and here's the point, we come to a stage in life where we're no longer going forward. There's a great gush, there's a great joy in life. And if you have a good angel with you, not a demon, not a kind of a voice that's pulling you down or forcing you to do negative things or constantly feeding you negative narratives about other people. The bitter little voice. And they're there in their droves. Like they're like fucking midges. You can't get rid of them. I mean, you get rid of one and there's another one. Sometimes, sometimes I open a newspaper or listen to the radio, and no matter what I hear on the radio, I immediately, instinctively take a negative view of it, which is a bitter view of it, which is me feeding my own bitterness. Could be about politics, could be about the British or the Irish, or could be Dublin 4 versus rural Ireland. It doesn't matter. Some subject just arises and you immediately take this negative view, this bitter view. And it's poisonous and you don't know where it comes from. And it's like there's millions of those little voices in your head. And sometimes they turn on you. Sometimes they actually turn on you. Like, imagine that you have this infestation of nasty little creatures that annoy everybody else. And then one day they turn on you. And the way they turn on you, I can talk about this because I've been there. The way they turn on you is where they start to tell you bad things about yourself. Negative narratives, not about the other people, which generates in you a kind of bitterness which is enjoyable. It's a kind of a very nasty pleasure where you're thinking negatively about somebody else, and it's a kind of it's a poison. But then they start turning on you. They start telling you you're no good. You end up with these voices in your head that are constantly telling you you're doing everything wrong. And that can oppress you to the point that they're out of control. What happened to me in 2011 and 2012, depression because there's so many negative voices and they don't let you even sleep at night, tormenting you with your failure, with your badness. Everything's used against you when those voices turn on you to tell you you're bad, you're useless, you're no good at anything. And there's ways out of that. There are many, many ways out of that. There's psychotherapy, there's all sorts of healing, there's medicines, there's love and care from the people around you. And sometimes there's actually your own inner strength. And that inner strength is like an angel. It's like a voice that overcomes all your demons and shows you the path. And it's like being loved at the deepest level of the interior. It's like saying that, okay, I am an embodied aspect of God's presence in the world. Just the same, when I look out the window and I see the clouds on Nerrigal and I see the beautiful light coming through, I feel transcendence. I feel that there's something absolutely, totally beyond everything and yet in everything, like a presence. I touch the possibility that I am part of God's spoken word through his angels. There's little aspects of my own self. Meister Eckhart talks about this. He talks about the human being, the psyche or the consciousness of a human being being like a saucer. And he says it is formed at various levels in different ways, so that the outer rim of your psyche, of the saucer, is formed by its interaction with what's beyond it. So social engagement, social interaction, the life you live at the external level forms you and forms your soul. And then inside in the saucer there's an inner layer. And it's formed by all those things like your psychological makeup and disposition and temperament and personality. And one feeds the other. But he says that there's a centre to the saucer, there's a centre to your psyche that doesn't connect with anything outside itself. It's like a black hole, a sense of being. So that the most deepest, intimate part of yourself is like it has nothing to do with any part of yourself. But go right within your own being, your own presence, and there is something in there that's like, it's not made by anybody or anything in the embodied universe. and yet it is the core center of you. It's God. It's why also that emptiness that you feel sometimes, you feel empty without God, and the emptiness is God. This center is always within us. And if anything, that's a place of angels, and a place of angelic wisdom, and a place of, I think, angelic power, to be honest. The more you go towards that center, the more you encounter angels. Which is to say, the more that you pray, the more that you are blessed by the manifestation of angels in your psyche. Every time I falter in life, it's usually to do with a negative voice telling me, you will falter, you will fail, you are no good, you are useless. Every time I falter, it is because such voices have spoken to me, tyrannized me to the point that I fall apart. And these can be understood in terms of psychology or psychotherapy, this moment of negativity. But for me, it's still valid to understand such moments as the tormenting of demons. The only way to deal with them, I've often said, is, I used the story by Milarepa. He's in the cave. The demons are annoying him. He can't pray, he can't rest, he can't relax. He goes for a walk. And when he comes back, they're still there in the darkness in his cave. And eventually he gives up and he says, okay, we're going to have to make peace. Would you like a cup of tea? And the demons say, oh, we'd love a cup of tea, that'd be grand. And so he makes them tea on condition that if he feeds them the odd cup of tea, they will leave him alone. And that has worked for me so many times in life, where I think of, various demons, and you can equate the legion of demons to the 7 deadly sins, if you like. If you take anger, which would be one that I would sometimes experience, anger can be a terrible thing when you express it. When you go at somebody, when you fling the arrows out at other people. There's a lovely and powerful phrase in the Quran which says, words are like arrows. Once released, they can never be taken back. So that's a very, very powerful way to train yourself in non-violence, verbally. And it's good, except that sometimes you can choke because you've so many arrows stuck in your throat. That by not releasing your anger, some modern people would say that it's bad, that you should get it out, you should express yourself, because if you keep it within, it'll make you unhealthy. I don't know about that. It depends what you do with it on the inside, it seems to me. It depends what you do with your anger. In my experience in life, I haven't seen it always successful when people express their anger, on the basis of a kind of a righteousness that, well, this is who I am, this is how I feel, this is my truth, and I'm telling you you're a bollocks. That just doesn't work for me. Because as I say, words are like arrows. Once released, you can't take them back. They change the cosmos. So your problem is, what do you do if the words are inside you? And that's where you have to deal with them like they're demons inside you. And I think that it is the angelic force within you that can liberate you. So here I am at